4 boys raped his sister and killed her, and he swore not to rest until he took revenge on them. The film starts with a street boy going toward a car where Beck is sleeping inside. Will knocks and wakes Beck. Will tells Beck about someone who is out, but Beck doesn't understand who he is talking about. Will says that Butch is out. After this, Beck arrives and buys something for 20. Then he goes aside and checks it. It's a wrapped sharp knife. After this, drug dealers are preparing drugs when Butch comes to them. Bez gets nervous seeing Butch, who is behaving weirdly, angry at the man because he was in jail for 3 years, and none of his partners came to see him in prison. So now he's here to take revenge. Butch takes drugs weirdly and constantly questions his partner's loyalty. Butch fires the security guard because he's pointing a gun at Butch to protect Bez. Then he fires Bez too. On the other hand, Beck is sitting on the street, talking to himself and feeling frustrated and lost. 4 years earlier, a girl was raped by 4 men. She tried to escape and begged for mercy while Butch saw her suffering and had no compassion for her. After this, Butch comes near Chrissy and asks for his money, but she refuses to give it to him. In an attempt to get his money back, but receiving nothing from Chrissy, he shoots her in the face terribly and shows no mercy. In the present day, Wilkes comes into a pizza shop searching for Jimmy, but can't find him. Then he goes to Amber and shames her for wanting to get married, suggesting that no one would marry a street whore. She leaves the shop, letting him know that Butch is out. Wilkes follows her and questions her about Butch. Amber mocks him, saying he runs the place like he owns it, and asking if Wilkes's boss is back in town. Angry, Wilkes slaps and kicks her badly, before calling someone to inform them about Butch's return. Meanwhile, Beck is sitting in the car, and the knife is placed next to him. Exhausted, Beck looks at his old photos in an army uniform and talks to himself. Then he gets out of the car and vomits beside it. A drug-addicted street boy, Will, comes to him, feeling crushed because he needs drugs to fulfill his addiction. Will asks Beck to bring him drugs. Beck refuses, saying he doesn't have any, and brings water for him to drink. Beck encourages him to get out of his drug addiction and shares his own sufferings. Beck says he forgot his name for 3 days after his first hit and became severely addicted. Even his father disowned him, and his sister left and was murdered by Butch, who shot her face and obliterated her skull. People at the funeral told Beck that his sister was unrecognizable from the bullet wound. Beck never went back home after his sister's death. Beck got depressed and more addicted just to deal with his pain. Will tells him that he heard about Beck's sister being involved with a rich man for money. Beck defends her, saying she was doing it to survive. Even though she sold her soul in the end for some loose change and became a drug supplier for money, she was raped because she couldn't pay Butch. Only Chrissy knows the true story of what happened to those drugs. That's why Beck advises Will to stop fending and go to Turkey. People who want change will definitely find a way. Will leaves him with no positive response. In the next scene, Scott is walking under an umbrella to get his money from a junkie, but doesn't get enough, so he threatens him to double the money by tomorrow and goes back. After him, Beck comes to the junkie to know what he handed to Butch, but he constantly denies having money and says he handed over an empty envelope. Because if he tells the truth, Butch will surely kill him, but if he doesn't tell the truth, Beck will kill him. Beck pushes him against the wall with a knife to his throat. The junkie admits to Beck that Wilkes comes daily to collect money from him as he sells drugs. After this, Beck is sitting in the car, staring frustratedly, and screams. Later, a salesgirl comes to give money to Butch for selling drugs. Elsewhere, Beck is smoking outside a car and notices a couple taking drugs inside another car. On the other hand, Wilkes is walking, calling someone, and going to collect money for drugs from a girl. When Kyle is checking the powder, Beck comes to him. Kyle thinks Beck is a crackhead, but he's not. Beck attacks Kyle with a knife and asks about Chrissy, as he raped her and showed no mercy. Beck kills him badly, as he deserves it. Beck is here to take revenge, and he takes it perfectly. While going back after the murder, he unconsciously touches a lady, leaving blood prints on her shoulder. Then the lady comes to the dead body and takes his car keys and money. Butch and Clive are standing on the road, looking at a car approaching them. Clive whispers to Butch, and Butch smiles. Then Wilkes comes to them, greeting Butch and Clive. Butch shakes hands with Wilkes and then punches his face hard, complaining that Wilkes never came to check on him in jail. Wilkes confesses that he deserves the punch and defends himself, saying he didn't visit Butch in prison because Butch was supposed to serve 8 to 12 months. But it ended up being 3 years. Wilkes says the shipment is ready to supply when Butch questions him about it. Wilkes hands over a gun to Butch. When Wilkes calls the supplier, the phone rings in Butch's pocket. Seeing this, Butch starts complaining to Wilkes about how he broke his trust, locked him in a cage, and stole his money. Then Butch shoots Wilkes multiple times, killing him on the spot. On the other hand, after killing the rapist, Beck is feeling nervous, sitting alone and holding a bloodied knife. Then he throws the knife into a pond, washes his hands in the pond water, and goes away. Candy is smoking on the road when Beck catches her. She tells him that Butch killed Wilkes and advises him to run far away when Beck asks about Butch because she thinks Butch will kill Beck too if he crosses his path. Candy isn't telling Beck about Butch and insists that he go far away. Beck advises her to leave the streets, but Candy says she has no one to worry about her, not even her dad. Meanwhile, Scott is sitting in a car, waiting for a junkie to collect money from him. When the junkie arrives, he runs away. Scott follows him, demanding the money and offering the drugs. Scott is pointing a gun at the junkie, but Beck attacks Scott and beats him mercilessly until he dies. Beck takes Scott's gun. After this, Clive calls someone but gets no response, so Butch asks him to get a whore to interrogate. Clive promises Butch he wouldn't kill her. Clive calls Candy to come over. She arrives at the door, knocks, and Clive grabs her inside. He tries to restrain himself, as Butch ordered him not to kill her. Candy curses him, so he slaps her. Frustrated, Clive slaps her multiple times when she doesn't give him the information he wants. Candy finally tells him about Butch's return and warns that they'll all die. Clive tries to calm her down, but ends up killing her. Candy tried to escape, but failed. Clive regrets killing her. Later, Beck is lying on the grass. Suddenly, he feels heavy and starts vomiting blood. Afterward, Clive is standing by the window when Butch arrives and asks about Candy. Butch asks if she is alive and what information she gave. Clive's gestures reveal that he killed Candy. So, Butch orders him to dispose of the dead body, and Clive confidently replies that he's professional at doing so. Butch becomes frustrated and shouts about Beck, the man whose sister he killed and who is now taking their lives. Butch reasons that Beck, an ex-military man, is seeking revenge. Butch and Clive argue, as Clive is also ex-military but hasn't been able to catch Beck yet. After that, Billy is at a mechanic shop, repairing his car's engine when Beck arrives and attacks Billy because he was also one of Chrissy's rapists. Billy tries to fight back in self-defense, but fails to escape and is killed by Beck. Later, Clive is sitting in a car, talking to Benj to find out if he has located Beck. He instructs Benj to find Beck quickly. Meanwhile, Beck is lying inside a car, drawing a smiley face on the glass window. On the other hand, Butch is frustrated, taking drugs, and attempting to commit suicide by putting a gun to his mouth. However, he can't go through with it. Later, Beck goes to a tuck shop, where the cashier lady notices him stealing a drink. He hides one in his pocket while pretending to inspect another. When the cashier approaches Beck and catches him, he apologizes, saying he's thirsty and has no money. The lady responds kindly, saying he could have simply asked, and she would have given it to him. Beck realizes that acts of kindness can change the world one step at a time. Outside, Beck drinks the stolen bottle. Meanwhile, Benj spots him and informs Clive, who orders Benj to bring Beck to him. Soon after, Beck is walking through a grassy area when Benj ambushes him with a punch, knocking him to the ground. Benj tells him that the boss wants to see him, but Beck denies having a boss. A fight ensues, with Beck overpowering Benj and biting his ear savagely. Benj screams in pain and struggles to escape but fails. Beck gets up, his mouth covered in blood, looking fierce. Meanwhile, Butch tries calling someone who doesn't pick up. Frustrated, he speaks with Clive, who informs him about Benj's gruesome death. Standing near Benj's body, Clive grows increasingly angry and vows to kill Beck. After hearing this, Butch inhales more drugs, becoming increasingly horrified and disoriented. Meanwhile, Beck is exhausted and lies down. Later, he wakes up in a car, surprised, as he remembers being unconscious on the grass. Street boy William found him sleeping helplessly and safely brought him to the car. William hands Beck a gun, urging him to finish the revenge he started for Chrissy, as Butch is unforgivable. Later, Butch is beating someone when Clive intervenes to save the victim. Meanwhile, Beck infiltrates Butch's house, searching for him with a gun. He finds Clive in the kitchen. Clive attacks Beck with an electric thermostat, and they engage in a brutal fight. Clive fails to escape and is killed by Beck with a knife. When Butch sees Beck in his house, he grabs a rod and runs outside. Beck chases him but stumbles and falls. Butch approaches and strikes Beck with the rod repeatedly. Beck's face is covered in blood as he struggles to fight back. Butch hurls insults at Beck and Chrissy, punching him relentlessly. Despite being weakened, Beck fights with determination. Finally, Beck manages to grab his gun and shoots Butch. After the first bullet, Butch begins apologizing and begging for his life, but Beck shows no mercy to the monster. Speaking on behalf of all of Butch's victims, Beck pulls the trigger again, killing him. Afterward, Beck sits on the grass, crying. The revenge he sought doesn't bring peace, but leaves an even greater void. Overwhelmed with despair, Beck puts the gun into his mouth and pulls the trigger, taking his own life. The film ends with Beck's tragic demise. If you enjoyed this movie, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.